Whenever in the world you're watching this, thank you so much for spending some time with me. Today is my Tuesday show called On Being a First-Time Leader. And I'm very passionate about that group of people because I've been a first-time leader many times, changing different, I worked for the government most of my life, so changing cities or changing government positions. And now I'm a new leader and people are often like, here's your desk, here's your people, go. And so there's a lot of questions and it's like, yeah, it's just my favorite spot because there's a lot of people lost in there. And I'm really excited to have one of my former coaching teachers. So he helped me become a coach. And then I went to one of his retreats as a client. And what a fantastic adventure both of those things were with me. And Nicholas George, I'm going to let him tell you about himself. And we'll get started like that. Okay, go ahead, Nicholas.
Hey, thanks. So yeah, again, I'm Nicholas George, and let's see, I am living in Nashville, recently retired. I say recently, in the last 2 years, retired from the military, specifically the Coast Guard after 21 and some change years of service. Spent a lot of that time towards the end there teaching and facilitating leadership to senior leaders in the military. Now I've transitioned out to Nashville and I work for a company called Usurion where I'm a senior manager in training as well, which involves a lot of leadership development, training development, things like that. So married, got 4 kids and 1 on the way and super excited about that, working from home in my basement, as you can see. So Here we are. So yeah, appreciate you having me on and we'll rap about leadership organically as we like to do.
Yes. So recently I've been having a topic so that, hey, Brandy, hey, thanks for stopping by. Brandy is one of my clients and students that we, maybe I should, not really a client, a student. When I teach, I taught a class for first-time leaders. Okay, so I have some questions already about what are your suggestions for first-time leaders. In the military, you said you dealt with senior leaders. Do you think like the advice or the work is different with senior leaders than first-time leaders?
No, and when you invited me onto this, whatever it was a week or 2 ago, and you mentioned that this was geared towards new leaders, I've kind of been thinking about like, what is one of the most common things that comes up for people when they're learning how to be a leader or they're being introduced to like leadership development. And one of the things I see a lot is people don't realize initially how much of a leader they are, right? And so I think a lot of times we think leadership development, my company or whatever sends me to get some leadership training, and you're getting some leadership training for the very first time. But one of the things I like to reflect to folks is, I'll ask a question, who here is a leader? And sometimes you don't get all the hands up, like everybody's a leader. It's not just work, it's home, it's life in general. Like whether you go to church or you coach a soccer team for your kids or you're a parent, that's a leadership role. Like every role that you're in is a leadership role. From the day you're born, you're leading yourself. And so every leadership development principle or anecdote that you can get out there, you can at the very least apply it to leading yourself. So we're born leaders. I very firmly believe that we're born leaders. Where you get to flex that leadership, depends on your path and where you're going, whether it be in an organizational environment, leading teams or whatever, or leading your family, leading your church, whatever that looks like. But yeah, I think becoming aware that, hey, I am a leader. And everything I learned from a leadership perspective, I can apply somehow in my life. So I think that's the first step. It's just acknowledging where you are a leader at and where you actually can dip into leadership experience and apply it, wherever.
Well, we have a new guest, Farsam. Tell us where you're from. He's coming in from YouTube because this is live on, which is amazing.
Yep.
For me in my lifetime, being as old as I am, it's like amazing. And there's Pete. Pete says, hola, hola, Pete.
Little
And,
Pete.
we're live on YouTube, Twitch. My kids are like, what's Twitch? I'm like, I am cooler than you are right now because I know
Hey,
Twitch.
you're cooler than me because I don't even know what Twitch is, to be honest with you.
Well, that's what the coach told me to do. So I try to do what my coach tells me to do. I can't say I always do it. But LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook live at the same time right now. Amazing. So you were saying that what I wrote down was, so when my head is down, I'm writing notes. I wrote down that it sounds like as an overall thing, we undervalue ourselves and our abilities. Like when someone says, hey, I'm going to send you to this leadership training, like me, I'm not a leader. So yeah.
So so like I've been leading a mentorship circle actually through my current job, and one of the first things that hey, why did you choose to join this mentorship circle around leadership development? And I think more of the answers was first time in a leadership position, and I immediately challenged that. Really, this is your very first time in a leadership position? Like,
Oh, I love that.
tell me about that, right? And like they've been, this is the first time I have a direct report that actually reports up to me in my job. Okay, so but that's only a sliver of leadership, right? Your leadership at work, sure, it's your first time in a leadership position at work, perhaps, but having a direct report assigned to you should not dictate when you're a leader, even in your job, right? Like you're a
Right.
lead when you show up, you're leading.
Mm-hmm.
Right? How you present yourself, how you walk in the door, how you network, how you influence things, how you say good morning to people, whatever the case may be. You're leading the moment you wake up. You're leading yourself and you're leading others because your impact and influence, whether it's unconscious or intentional, is happening constantly. Um, and I think about it with my kids, like. They can tell when you're in a mood. And if you don't acknowledge that, you could be not leading them effectively in that regard, right? And I've had that happen in work in my military career. Like I'm a very introverted person, so I can wear very blank expressions on my face. Like happy, sad, mad can look exactly the same for me.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so having that
I joke and sometimes go, no, this is my happy face.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
No, I am. Yeah.
And so it took me a long time to realize that a lot of people would ask me, hey, what's wrong with you? What's wrong? What's going on? What's wrong? And I'd be like, nothing, I'm fine. But I didn't have that awareness of like, I'm projecting based on other people's interpretation of how I look, that something's wrong. And I need to start having that self-awareness, which is the first step in leadership, is leading yourself, is that self-awareness piece, right? And so, once I realized, oh, you know what? I have this facial expression that tells people that I'm not happy. And so I have to actually communicate more to folks. Like it's an intentional effort to lead in that way, to make sure that the way I am, my personality isn't influencing others in a way that goes against what actually my leadership philosophy is, which is to create a steady and happy environment around me, to put it generally speaking. So, yeah, I mean, I kind of get on a little bit of a tangent there, but you're leading constantly, and I think that's the point I'm trying to make, is even just how you present yourself in the moment is a leadership,
right,
way. So
right, because people are always watching. I have more of the I'm thinking. I get like I'm having these conversations in my head. So I'm walking down the hallway and I'm looking like this. And I don't even realize it. I'm just going to get a cup of coffee, but I probably have an increased gait or something because I'm like inside my head. So I have projected like, stay away from me. She's upset. And plus I'm very tall. So and I have this back east kind of like straight talk. So people kind of stay away from me.
Yeah,
But
and if you think about it, and I'm going to butcher this quote by Maya Angelou, so I apologize to her, but she had a quote that's basically says, and I'm paraphrasing, uh, you don't remember great leaders for what they do. You remember great leaders for how they made you feel, right? Something to that effect, right? And so when you think about your great leaders, like the great leaders that you ever had, I'm not going to sit here and say, Joan, I had this great leader and he or she did this, that, and the other thing. I'm going to tell you exactly how I felt or how they were. Right? They were great. They were very had really great integrity and were always straight with me and taught me a lot, right? And that's all things how they made me feel. That's my great leader. I couldn't tell you what their paycheck was, or maybe even remember what their role was exactly from a organizational standpoint, or what KPIs they achieved in their job. I'm not going to be able to remember that. I remember what it was like to work with them from a relationship standpoint. So something to think about, like if you're, and that's what I'm saying, when you're leading, and that self-awareness, how you present yourself is a big portion of it for sure.
yeah, yeah. Before, when you were talking, well, before I say that, I will tell you the two best leaders, bosses that I've had, like, understood me and just let me do my thing. And I always respected them for their position and listened to what they said, but they didn't micromanage me. They didn't question everything I did. And completely different from a boss I had recently, a man we call the man whose name shall not be mentioned, checking everything I've done. I had been doing the job for 20 something years, which was code enforcement at the time, and checking everything, doubting everything. And, he knew this much about the subject, and I had been doing it for 20 years, but he was the boss. So the boss.
And so being smart about who your people are, right? Which brings me to another kind of scenario or story that, when I was a new leader. So when I was in the Coast Guard for, I don't know, 10 or 12 years at this point, I got moved into a pretty high up leadership position at a station, and literally had leadership experience, had people leading experience, but knew nothing in that position about like the mission or the daily stuff that we did there, right? And I knew that I would have to go in there and ask tons of questions. So new leader asking tons of questions can be interpreted as what? They don't trust, he doesn't trust us. He's micromanaging this or that or the other thing. The very first thing I did in all my one-on-one meetings with the people who reported to me directly was like, I'm going to ask a ton of questions. Like, be aware. I'm going to ask a ton of questions, not because I'm questioning what you're doing or how well you're performing, but because I'm learning this stuff. And so if I ever come off like I'm, or if you ever feel like I'm coming at you or micromanaging you, let me know so we can recalibrate and make sure that we're aligned on why I'm asking the things I'm asking, because I don't want you to get the wrong interpretation of how I'm showing up on a day-to-day basis. And never had an issue, right? Everybody understood right out of the gate that, oh yeah, he's asking questions because he literally doesn't know, right? So definitely something to think about there for new leaders, and maybe not even new leaders, but seasoned leaders going into a new role, right? New people, new leaders, new group dynamics. You're going to completely go through the cycle of group dynamics all over again, and being aware of that. Like, we're going to have to go right through that forming stage, where we all get to know each other and, get through the honeymoon and the storming phase and all that kind of stuff, right? So it's very real,
Yeah, and asking a lot of questions can make employees think that you're going to do a lot of changing. Oh, if he's asking me about that, he's going to change it. And one thing I've said, and people disagree with me, and I think I may have actually lost a job over saying this at an interview, but I'm not big on changing. Like when people say that's the way it's always been, so we have to change it. I'm big at saying, how come? That's, like maybe they have already investigated it and that's what works. Like if it's not broke, don't fix it. But become at everything with curiosity. To say that's why you've been doing it for 20 years. Go over, show me how it goes. And well, now we have computers. Now we have this. Now we have that. And see if you can make the change instead of just going, oh my God, you're still using paper. We're using computers starting tomorrow. So things like that.
Yeah, certainly.
Mm-hmm. I see in the background your blues. Does it say Stanley Cup on the bottom? No, Stanley Cup
Yes.
champions. What year was that?
That was the year before the pandemic started. So the last official real Stanley Cup, I think. That's how I tell people. Yeah.
Okay.
The last full season, actually. Yeah,
Okay.
no, 2019. So it was that year. Yep.
Wow, nice. Well, I just want to remind you that I'm from Philly, and we
Oh,
had
here we go.
hat trick. 1976, we had a hat trick, and what amazing! Like people just came out of their houses, and just no matter where you lived, it was crazy. It was crazy, crazy,
Yeah,
crazy.
and that's how it was for this team, right? They've been around for 50 plus years and first championship. So like the
Right.
city was just like beside themselves, So it was really cool.
Well, there is a lot of teamwork, and there is a lot of leadership. What I wanted to say is there is a lot of leadership in teamwork.
Mm-hmm.
And to get to the Stanley Cup, there has to be a lot of things moving in the same and opposite direction at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Right, leading and following is sort of synonymous, right? Knowing when to lead, knowing when to follow is again back to that self-awareness piece. Like you can be a leader and a follower in the same breath, right? Knowing like not to sound crazy, but knowing your role, like having very specific understanding of what clarity on what your role is in a team is an effective leadership characteristic, right? Like there's going to be moments when that role requires you to step up and lead from whatever that responsibilities are, but also when your responsibility or what your expertise is when it's not needed is knowing like when do I get to be a contributor in this team versus a leader. Um, and it all comes with with time, right? And like you said, curiosity and knowing what you're responsible for, which sort of alludes me to and I love the word curiosity because one thing I challenge folks when I'm working with them from a leadership perspective out of the gate is understanding what their values are, and then also understanding like what is your leadership philosophy, and defining that. And your leadership philosophy and your values should sort of be blended, right? Come up with understand what your values are, and then your philosophy can be constructed from those values that you carry. And so for an example, my personal values, I have 5 of them, is freedom, service, integrity, and love. 4, sorry, freedom, service, integrity, love. And so for me, I have developed my leadership philosophy over the years to just basically be these 2 things: always be curious and know what I'm responsible for. Because if I'm curious, I'm creating that sense of freedom for myself to create and to collaborate with folks. Um, and then it's service focused, being curious, right? Hey, what do you do? Like, what can I do to help you? That kind of curiosity, right? Like, how do you want me to be as your leader? What do you expect from me as your leader? Like those kind of curiosity kind of questions. Integrity, I think, is really important to me. I think that you don't want to gaslight the people that work with you, right? Like, hey, this is my value. I value service, and then you don't do anything for your people. That's that's not an integrity with what you advertise your values as. So being an integrity, and integrity means also like doing what you say you're going to do, and when you can't do it, do what you say you're going to do. Own up to it, right? Own what you said you're going to do. I think is even more important. And then love, love is like is everything, it transcends work, life, whatever. And I think showing up compassionate and humbly and caring for the people that you work for, whatever, is probably one of the ultimate leadership characteristics to have. So, so with your just with your everyday decisions, whether you're conscious of it or not, you're making decision based on those values. So the more you understand that those are your values driving you, the more you can be more intentional and consistent for your people, because people want to know what they're getting, right? When you get a new leader come to lead you, you're thinking, how is this person going to be? What are they going to change? Where are they taking us, right? So if you come out of the gate, hey, this is who I am, this is where we're going, and this is what's important to me, and you follow through with that, like people are gonna at the very least be content with who you are as a leader.
Well, what I do is I teach people to write their what I call leadership legacy story, and that involves their values and their leadership philosophy and who they are, and then to tell your employees about it so that they know what to expect.
Mm-hmm.
If
Right.
If integrity is one of your highest values, you're going to know the ramifications if you're not honest with me, if you're doing something shisty. Yeah, I did. For some reason, I'm reminded of this story about curiosity. I had an employee, and he had put a PowerPoint presentation together for this community cleanup we were doing, and it just the slides were like jam packed with stuff. And I thought I said, now again, the Philadelphia accent and mannerisms sometimes take over, but I said, hey, so I'm curious, have you ever had a PowerPoint class? Oh my God, he got so offended. He made such a big deal. I mean, he was laughing and everything. He's like, are you kidding me? What are you talking about? Blah, 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 blah. I've done this and I've done this and I've done this. And I'm thinking, then why do you got so much stuff on your slide? But, just approach it with, curiosity and a little bit of levity instead of taking everything so seriously. I tell people taking offense is an action. You're taking offense. You can let it go by. Like I say, sports analogy, I'm center field and I'm ready for anything that comes in center field. If something comes in left field, it's not my deal. I stay still. My mitt is down. If something comes like in the border, we're going to talk to each other. We're going to communicate. And then still, I may step back and keep my mitt down. And there used to be a show years ago called Kung Fu. And the guy literally was never actually in a fight. He just kind of avoid anything that came near him. He just like avoided it. So I don't know if you know this book called The Four Agreements.
Yep, for sure.
Well, one of them is, don't take things personally. And they're not out there doing it to you. They're just out there doing it. I was taught that years ago. If anyone is still out there listening, put a question in the comment section about leadership, and either Nick or I will answer it for you. You know what it's interesting that you have freedom as your top value. I have a show on Sundays called Stories of Serendipity and Synchronicity. I got to find a new name because I always get them mixed up. And there was a woman and a man team, business partners that were on. And she said that when she was looking at all the lists, she looked at freedom and she said, who would ever have freedom? It's like, that's not really a value, and that doesn't really work, and blah, blah, blah. And then she was going back, she came back to freedom again, and she goes, basically, that's it. Freedom. It encompasses everything. I have the freedom.
Literally what we're striving for constantly is freedom.
Yeah, freedom.
We want to be purposeful and autonomous and free to make decisions for our lives. It's freedom. Like we want to lead ourselves. So yeah, for me, if I'm in conflict in any way, the very first thing I assess is how do I not feel free in this moment? Right? That's like a question I ask myself. How do I not feel free in this moment? And if I ruminate on that long enough, it'll present itself, and the answer is not always one I like to, know, but it's an answer, and you move through it as best you can in the moment. But and it could be, and I purposely say freedom is my top value, because if service, integrity, or love is not available to me in that moment, then freedom is probably not available to me either. Because without those other three values, it's hard to feel free. If I don't feel like I can be in service the way I want, or creative, or if I feel conflicted in my integrity or authenticity, yeah, you're going to see that freedom is not available. There's a question.
Brandy has a question.
Yeah. See, did you notice a difference when working in the private sector? Yes and no. I think the biggest difference, and I don't think this is going to come as a surprise, is culture, right? Learning how to assimilate your leadership style from one culture to another, I think, is probably the biggest challenge or opportunity, however you want to look at it. And, in a military culture, things can be, from a people aspect, you take orders, you give orders, you follow orders. There's like literally a code of behavior. There's what we call military bearing, right? You act a certain way, like the culture was almost like prescribed to you in a sense. In the private sector, I think cultures are not so much prescribed, but cultivated, right? So like it's cultivated by the company's values, what their mission is, things like that. And so I think that learning the culture of a private sector company can be a little bit more challenging, because there's nuances that aren't maybe totally put out there. Whereas in the military, it's almost prescribed to you in a sense. Like you wake up, you put on a uniform, you stand up straight, you say, yes, ma'am, no, sir, whatever. And well, you never say no, sir, but you understand what I'm saying. But yeah, so I think that, and I mean, and especially, another caveat, from personal experience, spending 21 years in the military organizational leadership environment and switching to a private sector is just a shift in itself, right? Because like you get so used to 2 decades of knowing what you're doing, and it gives all new meaning to being a new guy when you have years and years of leadership experience and in one area, and you shift over to a new completely different area, and you're like, oh, you really start questioning how well you can be as a leader in this new culture, because you're like, this is totally foreign to me. So it's definitely a challenge. But to answer your question, circling back, I think culture is the biggest difference to look forward to when going from military to private sector, for sure.
Brandy works in government in code enforcement, where I used to work. And so how I was relating to that, I've moved 5 times, I think. And at least it was like within government. So there were some things that were going to be normal. But if I went from government after 35 years to private, it would be different. It would be a big shock. It's just like you're saying, the overarching, no matter where you get assigned in the military, we do this, and this, Yeah.
You move every 3 or 4 years. And I think that's the reason why culture is prescribed, right? Because there's almost like a standard way to behave, so that no matter where you get stationed, whatever, like, what to expect from a cultural standpoint. Now, obviously, the prescription's not always 100%. Like there's going to be some variables and some misbehavior and things like that, but more or less, like, you understand what you're supposed to do in that environment. I mean, the military literally has a whole its own set of laws, right? UCMJ. So like it's prescribed to that level, So
yeah. And some of the things that you said, including culture, kind of reminds me of energy, the transference of energy back and forth. And then I had a follow-up question on that. Do you have anything you want to say about how energy impacts your leadership? Or wait, here we go. I have worked all three, but I felt that military was a better fit for me. Yeah. Tell us more about
Um,
that. Tell us more about that, Brandy.
yeah, right. I'll reflect something on that too. Is when I came into the private sector, I think I had moments where I was like, man, it'd just be easier just to be back in the military because I know what to expect.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but also, I think the one thing I had to acknowledge is that um, I went through a pretty extensive interview process, and they were very aware of my military background, and so, you know, I took that as a challenge. Like they hired me knowing that I'm bringing 21 plus years of military experience, which, hey, you know what? That's going to mean I have been a part of this other culture. So what does that tell me? My interpretation is they want to bring some of that culture, some of that leadership into their culture as well. So don't, for me, I learned like don't stray from that what you learned in that other culture. Don't abandon it. Like that's what's prepared you, and that's what appealed to them when you're going through the interview process. So don't abandon that part of yourself. Like show up in that structured way and lead. Leadership doesn't have boundaries, and that's one of the biggest things that I've learned, that I lead more or less the same now in the private sector that as I did when I was in the military sector, and it's just as well received as it ever was in the military. Um, Sometimes, in some instances, even more so, um, because it's not expected in some ways to be, to have the regiment that I do and things like that. So
Mm-hmm.
um, you bring value, and when you're hired based on that value. So don't abandon it. You know,
Mm-hmm.
is
Mm-hmm.
something I'd say, and I had to learn that, for myself, um, in my transition. So
Well, I don't know if you'll relate to this, but I often think because I worked 35 years in government, and I could so relate to that part in Shawshank Redemption where the guy says, I'm institutionalized. I know nothing else but it's breakfast, it's lunchtime, it's yard time, it's, whatever time. And as I seriously approached my retirement, my real retirement, because I had a job up in the Bay Area that I was on a contract, and that's a whole long story, part of my pain and suffering over the past few years. But they didn't renew the contract with me after 3 years, and it just sent me on a spin in a really bad, dark place. And so then when I thought about working for the private sector, I was like, I don't know. Government is, see, I don't know the military, and I think government is very strict. Like some of the stuff people are talking about right now, I'm not saying we're good at it. I'm not saying we're perfect at it, but equality, inclusion, race, transgender, I mean, we have been working with that and laws on that and everything for years that we have had to abide by. So I'm kind of shocked that some companies have never had such a thing. So
yeah, and I think I understand what you're saying there. I think that whether it's private or government, military, I think any organization um, who wants to be successful knows that they have to invest in those areas, right? Diversity and inclusion. I think that's a huge important piece. It doesn't matter like what you are from an organizational standpoint. Diversity and inclusion is almost paramount because and not in just like today's society standards, I mean, from all time, like you, um, it it breeds, I think, a more effective culture. It breeds more collaboration. It breeds safety, I think is a big one, right? Like one of our basic needs is to feel secure.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you go into an environment where inclusiveness and diversity is promoted, like that tells you right there, right out of the gate, that this is a safe space for me to be who I am,
Mm-hmm.
which puts you at ease and makes you more effective when it comes to performance, right? Because I'm telling you, like if you don't feel safe energetically, spiritually, mentally, physically, emotionally, the only thing you're going to be focused on is your safety. You're not
Mm-hmm.
going to be focused on
Mm-hmm.
anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So, diversity and inclusion, I think, is a very foundational um, focus that any organization should be focused on. Very foundational, in my opinion, to promote safety and security amongst their people, um,
Mm-hmm.
to get the most out of them, for sure.
Right. It's the basic need.
Hmm.
Um,
Yep.
a question I'd like to ask you for an employee what I deal with a lot with my clients and when I did my research on what first time leaders suffer with and um, is inheriting a bad employee. Let me rephrase that: an underperforming employee. And so now you have the employee and you're starting again and you're trying all the tricks that you know, all the things that you know, all the things that everyone before you has done. And the person is not responding, but does pretty good work when he or she actually wants to work or has some value, but is not following the path.
Yeah. I mean, um, my response to that, and I'm not sure exactly what you're looking for, but I think that having the courage to have difficult conversations is very important. I think as leaders and as human beings, because right, we're leaders and human beings. I think for a lot of times we get conflict avoidant or we get competitive with conflict. I think rarely new leaders understand that they need to be collaborative. They might know that logically, but to be collaborative is like very difficult because you have to get yourself out of your own way in a lot of ways. And so, um,
Wait, can I
you know,
let me interrupt for a second.
yep,
Conflict avoidant, and then there was something that you said that I had never heard of before. That you fight with
competitive. Yeah,
competitive. Can you tell me
yeah,
what that is?
yeah. So, I mean, I'll give you. So, I don't know if you've heard of Thomas Kilmann instrument, but they categorize conflict in 5 different ways, right? So you have competition, avoidance, collaboration, accommodation or accommodating, and then compromising. So those 5 spaces you can show
Okay.
up in
Okay.
conflict.
All right.
I think by and large, you'll see most people show up in competition, avoidance, or accommodation. Um,
Mm-hmm.
we
Mm-hmm.
work towards compromise and collaboration, but those are more difficult because that takes some surrender, that takes some humility, that takes some curiosity, it takes the ability to seek to understand before seeking to be understood, right? That adage. Um,
Stephen
and
Covey.
so yeah, and so when you even said it yourself, right? I have a client that has a bad employee, right? So that we automatically think when someone's not doing what they're supposed to do, we throw a judgment word out. They're bad, lazy, fill in the blank, right? Um, and think about that. Like if that's your core thought leading into that conversation,
Mm-hmm.
how's that conversation going to go?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like if you're walking into a conversation thinking that this person's lazy, you're leading with this thought that they're a bad employee, the conversation is going to be around you thinking they're a bad employee. What's that going to do to them? It's going to put them on the defense, right? Like they're going to feel that vibe, they're going to feel that energy, right? So one thing that I taught a lot in the military leadership classes is approaching situations where you're holding people accountable from a very objective standpoint. So I'll give you an example, and we'll use like not showing up at the prescribed time to work,
Okay.
like very very easy one, right? So um, your employee let's say you're supposed to be at work at 8 o'clock, right? They show up at 8:15. Everyone's first instinct is to say, why were you late? Right? Why were you late is a judgment. How do you know they were late? Right? You don't know they're late. There's many variables that could make it to where they weren't late. Okay. I overslept, not probably one that's acceptable, or I hit traffic, or I worked late yesterday and your boss told me I can come in at 8:15 today. Are they late? No, we don't know. So we think it's easy and okay to assume things, but we rarely ever know the full story. Sometimes our assumptions might be right. Sometimes they might not be. So going into every situation where um, you're confronting an issue, right? You should go in stating the expectation or the standard against whatever the behavior was, right? So an example with like quote unquote the late scenario. Hey, employee, the standard here is that you show up to work at 8 o'clock. I noticed that you came in at 8:15 today, right? Is there any judgment there? No, you just stated the standard and then the behavior or what happened, right? Pause. Don't ask why. Don't say what's wrong with you. Why are you late? Don't jump into accusations. Just say, hey, the standard or the expectation is that you're here at 8 o'clock. I noticed that you weren't here till 8:15. Pause. Let them fill in the blank.
Mm-hmm.
More often than not, most good employees are going to say, oh, yeah, I hit traffic. Or, hey, I sent you an email yesterday letting you know that I was not going to be in until 8:15, or whatever the case may be. You never know. And that puts you in a more collaborative space by approaching these situations much, much more objectively and not coming out and accusing people of things, right? Even if they're late, if you say, why are you late? It's gonna cause conflict,
Mm-hmm.
right? So always approach it objectively, state the standard versus the behavior, allow them to fill in the blank, and you
Mm-hmm.
may find out something good happened. It's not that you're trying to dig up dirt. You might be digging up gold by just coming at it, objectively. Um, so like I said, it's always, leading yourself is the first step. Like, how are you
Mm-hmm.
leading yourself into conversations with people? If you're not doing that self check in the moment, like, am I going into this conversation with a biased thought? If you are, chances are you're already leading it down the wrong path.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's the part that you own. That's your responsibility in that space. So
Well, that sounds like a great pullover from working for the military, because I like how it keeps you in objectivity. I'm I'm just saying this is the standard. This is what I'm seeing. So it's not about Joan. It's outside of me. These are the things we all agreed on as a team when we were working in this dispatch center or whatever.
yep, these are the behaviors I observe, and compared to the standard, they don't line up. So help me understand the gap,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm,
And they could have a completely reasonable response to why the gap exists, which may illuminate an organizational deficiency that you could both work on together to shore
mm-hmm,
up. Or maybe they just aren't performing well. But
mm-hmm.
if you come out with, hey, you're not performing well, you may have missed an opportunity. You're already missing an opportunity for collaboration right out of the gate
Mm-hmm.
with accusations.
Right. And everyone is watching you. Everyone is watching.
Mm-hmm.
If this person comes in 8:15, 8:20, 8:17 every day and you do nothing, or this is the first time this person has ever been late in 6 years and you're jumping all over them.
Yeah, exactly. And as a leader, and like we just kind of calling back to what we talked about in the beginning of this conversation, everybody's like you just said too, is everybody's watching, right? And so as a leader, especially with a team or a group, you're setting the standard of how conflict is resolved within your group by showing up this way
Mm-hmm.
and being consistent. Because when you move from the forming stage to the storming stage, and you show up and you facilitate the conflict and or mitigate the conflict, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're learning by your leadership in those conflict scenarios, how to resolve it for themselves in the future, so that when they move out of the storming phase as a team and get into more the norming and performing space, the
Mm-hmm.
biggest thing that you're going to see is that the team is resolving its own conflict without its
Mm-hmm.
leader.
Mm-hmm.
And so you know that you've done a good job
Mm-hmm.
with addressing possible performance issues when you
Mm-hmm.
see your team holding itself accountable and resolving its own conflict,
Yeah.
right? So
Is that the 5 dysfunctions of a team that you're referring to? The storming.
it's no, that's the stages of group dynamics. So
Okay.
if you just were to Google stages of group dynamics, you're going to get the 4 stages, which I just named, and then there's like a fifth one that was added not too long ago. So it goes forming, storming, norming, performing, and then a fifth one was added later called adjourning. And so when you look at this, most when you put a team together, you have the forming stage, right? Where, right, honeymoon phase, right? Everybody's getting to know each other. You're keeping your thoughts to yourself. You don't want to offend anybody.
Everyone's on
You
their
want to get
best
along.
behavior.
Everybody's on their best behavior, right? Then you get a little bit more familiar with each other, and you let down your guard. You start showing your true colors, if you will, and conflict comes up. So the next stage is storming, right? Like people start establishing themselves as leaders, or maybe their assertiveness comes out more, and so the storming phase, pops up. And in the storming phase, that's like the most important phase for a leader, to get in there, dig in, and lead that group through the storming phase. Some groups stay in storming for a long time, right? And then once you graduate from storming, you go into norming, where everything sort of normalizes. Everybody starts to understand what their roles are, their place in the whole team. And then once everybody buys into that and understands what their role is, and everything normalizes, then you get that performing stage where
Mm-hmm.
everybody's clicking on all cylinders. Everybody knows their job, taking initiative, doing things without being told. Everything's going great. And then obviously, when, let's say, the team is formed for a project, you break up that team. A lot of times people just break up a team and they just go, and then people are left without the sense of purpose they had from this really great team they had. So
Mm-hmm.
it's important to also adjourn the team. Hey, our time together is coming at a close. Let's get together and celebrate our accomplishments as a team and adjourn this group. And that provides the closure at the end of the
I
whole
love
team
that.
aspect.
Love that.
Um,
You could even
Another caveat. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
you could even do that with each project.
Yeah, absolutely. And another caveat too, right? And we experience this a lot in the military, and even in the private sector, is new employees come on. You have a good team, right? They've been through the storming phase. They're norming. They're performing. Whatever. 99.9% of the time, you introduce a new team member to that group, you go right back to forming. You got to get to know that person. That person's got to get to know you. You'd introduce a whole different personality to the group. So you reset to forming. So the stages of group dynamics they move around, right? It's dynamic, hence the word group dynamics. You could revert back to a stage. So as a leader, it's very important to understand that what stage your team is in, so that
Mm-hmm.
you can properly show up. Because in a forming stage, you're a leader. You're out in front. You're leading them out in front, telling them, hey, this is what to expect. These are the standard. These are the rules of the road, right? In the storming stage, the leader is going to be they're going to be in the middle, right? Managing the conflict between the team, setting the standard of what conflict resolution looks like. Um, in the norming stage, the leader can be a part of the team more, right? They can be working
Mm-hmm.
with the team in the
Mm-hmm.
norming. And then once the team gets to the performing stage, the leader can just step out, and the
Mm-hmm.
team goes and does their thing, and the leader just allows them to be. Um, yeah. So knowing what stage your team is in tells you how to show up as a leader as well.
That reminds me a lot of situational leadership, which is more
Mm-hmm.
one-on-one instead of the group.
Yeah.
But we're coming to the end. The other thing I wanted to ask you about is that first-time leaders have a hard time saying no or delegating work that they
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't, if we can say shouldn't be doing, that's not in the best interest of the company for them to be doing.
Hmm. So hard time saying no. That's a difficult one. I would say if you're experiencing that space of having a hard time saying no as a new leader, I think that if you're experiencing that, I think that one thing that you need to do is probably be more curious. Be more curious why you're having a hard time saying no. Find a mentor, coach, whatever, and sort of go through that. Because no, I think is just as impactful as yes. No promotes not conflict, but it may cause a little disagreement, and disagreement is a really great place to learn about your role, how others are, what your preferences are. So really getting a really solid understanding of why it's hard to say no from a self-awareness perspective, I think is the key there. Like, are you afraid to say no? What happens if you say no? What's the answer to that? Like really drilling down to that energy you have around saying no.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
it could be saying no. I would say it depends on in my role in my current position, we're more of a support team, right? So we lead training, so we provide training for others, very service focused. And so I can confidently sit here and say that no is not my vocabulary from a service and support standpoint in my current role.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not from a fear-based no is not my vocabulary. We're going to find a way to support you. It may not be the exact way you come at me with, hey, can you support me like this? Or we need this here. I'm not going to say no, but I may say, yeah, let's give it a shot. And here's some, let's collaborate on how we can make this work for both of our teams to make this, the end goal happen. I'm never going to say no. I might say yes, but, or yes, but can we do this as well? Or, get very curious about the situation and to try to facilitate the collaboration. But that's a good question. I think self-awareness is key for sure, and understanding what your role is and in the organization is also very, very, very key as well. So, I don't remember the second part of your question. So,
It was how to delegate, which is kind of the same. They go hand in hand. Say,
yeah,
it's not actually.
yeah,
You often don't actually have to say the word no.
hmm
Just say, "This is better if you work on it," instead of me. Instead of what happens is they want to be liked.
hmm
They want everyone. They're afraid of getting fired, so they want to look good. So they'll say, different kinds of employees will be like, I can't figure it out. And then a certain kind of leader, manager, supervisor says to themselves, it's going to take me 2 hours to explain it. It's going to take me 15 minutes to do it. I'll just do it. Then the next thing you know, the manager has more work than the employees.
right.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, absolutely. And then you don't have space to lead.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for coming to the end.
Yeah.
How can anybody get a hold of you if they want to follow up with you or hear more about you?
Just they can
Sorry about that.
No, it's fine. Direct message me on LinkedIn, on Facebook, Nicholas George PCC on all the areas. So yeah, happy to facilitate conversations, help anybody out. Very service oriented, as you already know. So yeah, absolutely.
It's interesting because about saying no, I thought I have the freedom to say no.
Yeah.
It kind
Yeah,
of
you are free to say no. It's your life. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's your life.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Absolutely not. Which, maybe it's another topic, but, going into interviews for jobs, like you're free to say no to a job that doesn't feel right.
Right.
Like you're interviewing companies as much as they're interviewing you. So,
Exactly.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely.
Okay. Have a great day. Have a great night. And we'll talk later.
All
Okay.
right.
Bye,
Thank you.
everyone. Thank you.